Hey everybody, welcome to another video. I got a book from thriftbooks.com. Not that I'm plugging thriftbooks.com, but this is a book that, this is the third time I've got this book. I got this book when it first came out in 1984. I rebought it again in like 1984, 5, 10 years later. And now here we are 30 years later, and I bought it again. The book is called In Search of Tomorrow. Sorry, I think of something else. In Search of Forever by Rodney Matthews. If anybody doesn't know, Rodney Matthews is I believe he's still alive, is a fantasy artist. Most notable for a lot of his stuff he did with the Elric of Melniboné by Michael Moorcock. He did a lot of Nazareth album covers, Diamond Head, I think he did a Kansas cover, I believe, and a bunch of other kind of 70s bands. His predominant, time was in the 70s, early 80s, and a lot of fantasy novel covers, a lot of Andre Norton, and I bought the book, oddly enough. I'll tell you my story with it. In 1984-ish, no, 85-ish, yeah, I was probably 12, was I 12? Yeah, I was 12 years old. I used to go to, obviously, remember, I was going up to Rochester Book Center to get comic books, to get, and going over to Kittyland, that little area there, that little shopping center across from Rochester High School. I've talked about this many a times in my other videos, so go back and watch some of my other videos about that place. Rochester Book Center, like I said, was a very magical place for me. So was Kittyland for toys, but Rochester Book Center was like my first place to get comics, my first place getting comics in '84. My just love of fantasy came about from that, specifically that bookstore, and my love of fantasy art specifically. So I had ridden my bike, or walked. I probably rode my bike, most likely, if I can remember. I remember buying it. I don't remember how I got there, though. I know I got there by myself, though, because I had to go back home and come back. I didn't live that far. I lived maybe, like a 10-minute bike ride from there. But not really that far. I would say, I guess, 5 or 6 blocks, if you were to think about it. It kind of had to go uphill, though. Anyways, I remember I'd go in there all the time, and they kind of knew me by that time, just like Kittyland knew me. And I would go in there looking at all the fantasy art covers and all the books, and I was just blown away by them. And then I was talking about a specific book. Now I don't know which one it was specifically, but I had picked up a book with a Rodney Matthews cover, and I said, and they said, "Oh yeah, you're really into those fantasy books and science fiction books." I said, "I just love the art." I said, "I can't read these, but I just love the art." And one guy behind the counter goes, "That's Rodney Matthews." And I'm like, "Okay." And he said, "There's a book right behind you that's got his artwork in it." I turned around, and I totally missed it. There was this book, and it was on a little stand. They had a kind of like, they put newer books and stuff around. This is 1985. If you look at the copyright in this book, I was curious. Yep, 95. It's 1985. 1985 was the copy, right? And that's the year I was there. Again, I was 12 years old. Very I'm my son's age right now. Very impressionable time when it comes to just soaking this stuff in. And, got a few things. Before I get into the book, I got a few things to say. First and foremost, I find that a lot of the fantasy artists today are so, not only are they so obscure, like this video, probably nobody will watch it. It's like, who? Rodney who? They won't care. There's so many, and like I said, Rodney Matthews, Roger Dean, does all the Yes covers and whatnot. Asia, he does Aqua, the Asia cover. Again, remember I told you, all of this stuff is interconnected. It's all in a prog rock family tree kind of way, how comic books, artwork, toys, fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons, prog rock, all that stuff, it's all interconnected, right? So, and I find that whole world is slow, not slowly, but very quickly evaporating to where it's becoming non-existent, because I see very little, if not any, younger people. And I'm not saying like, you know, like my son's age. I'm talking younger as in like 35, 40 younger. Remember, I'm 50. I'll be 51 in another couple of months. So this stuff is, as the bands grow older and die off, as the artists grow older and die off, and as the new companies, whether it's nobody reads books anymore anyways, so if it's new book publishing, you know, posters, I mean, this stuff it was a whole industry of just making posters and selling posters and prints. I feel that is kind of going away as well. You know, as the rise of AI art and as the rise of commercial art has kind of gone into like this whole, you know, I don't know, I just feel like a lot of it's, you know, all this underrated, awesome stuff, very very influential with inspiration, all that stuff, it all just seems to be, I know I'm old man yelling at the cloud, but I mean, it just seems like it's all going away in lieu of other things. Not to say that people don't like art, but I think people, you know, don't even know about this stuff, you know, and like I said, that whole, you know, you can do it on the internet now. You can go on and look at artwork, obviously, but I think there was something special about being young, being on your own, as far as I rode to the store, or rode to the bookstore, or rode somewhere by myself, or walked there without my parents, and you know, and you had time. It was summer between, you know, like I said, for me it was between 6th and 7th grade. I was going to go to junior high in 7th grade for the first time come that fall, and I think this was pretty much definitely in the summer. It might even be late summer too, if I can think. Well, I don't know. You know, I remember it was hot-ish, sunny that day. Yeah. So anyway, back to the book. So anyway, I just wanted to go on that little rant there for a second. So I turn around and I see this book, and what caught my eye, of course, and still to this day, is look at the size of it. It's 12 inches, 12 by 12. Right? What's the same size of album covers? I just love album covers. You know, I mean, that's why I love my vinyl collection. I love that it's having a comeback. I love that's one thing younger people are appreciating, are these covers and this artwork, and like, hey, they want the total package. I mean, these are the guys, like this artist specifically was one of the seminal people that brought you that type of thing. You know, and I just want to, first of all, as an introduction, let me just read you this short, I'm not going to read the whole thing, this is a short part of the introduction. Bear with my reading, of course. But it says, Section 1, Introduction. There's the page here, I'll show you. Why fantasy? This question is more likely to be asked now than it was 10 years ago. Remember, this is 1985. But the changing whims of fashion, let me pause there. That's the thing. Art is fashion. You know, anybody to tell you it isn't is wrong. You know, I don't know how all my art teachers I've ever had, including art teachers in college, they've always said the same thing: is art is fashion. It is. It's what's fashionable, just like clothing, right? Or trending, or whatever word you want to use for it. But more so fashion. You know, if things are out of fashion, you know, this artwork, this type of thing seems to be out of fashion, although hopefully it's making a comeback. Sorry, I keep bumping the table. So again, I say, yeah, it says the question is more likely to be asked now that it has been 10 years, but the changing whims of fashion should not be confused with a fundamental change in human nature or truth. And this is what he's going to get into. Fantasy is a component of the human psyche, which has always existed, and most likely always will exist. Now that is true. So, you know, fantasy, until, you know, the thought police come in and, you know, start throwing people and taking people, you know, and to the guillotine for having fantastic ideas. which may come sometime soon. This exactly, this type of stuff will always exist in people's head. People always think of the fantastic fantasy, especially your escapism. Especially as the world gets rougher, more and more people are escaping. I think more people now are escaping reality and going into a fantasy world, whether it's virtual reality, whether it's social media, whether it's streaming constantly, binge watching TV shows or for hours or days on end. I think a lot of people now are more so, especially younger people, are really escaping into the fantasy realm, and because of the times we're in, whatever country you're in. I mean, in the United States, obviously things are starting to look pretty shitty here. Other countries have it worse than we do, and so I think people will escape fantasy, escape reality by going into fantasy. So what he says is fundamentally true. It's a component of the human psyche which always has and will most likely always exist. Like I said, unless somebody stamps it out. Though the form it adopts and the esteem in which it is held, hold that thought too, may vary. So the form at which it adopts, so whatever it is, if it's, for the longest time, obviously before the internet, before video games, or before even television really caught on a lot, fantasy existed with novels, literature. And I won't even go into classic, old for literature. I'm talking just modern for literature, as in the last, say, 100 years. And we've got, the turn of the century era, which is a little bit older than 100 years, is when we had stuff like H.P. Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard, and then you go into, or Jules Verne, then William S. Burroughs. Then you go into stuff like Tolkien, Philip K. Dick, all of these classic fantasy, Andre Norton, all these fantasy writers, and that's how it existed. So when he says whatever forms it adopts, in the 70s, a lot of this fantasy stuff became on film. It got into bands and album covers. It seemed like it was that kind of thing. Into the 80s, it started, comic books, cartoons. It started to slowly creep into video games, the early video games, whatever, like I said, whatever, and so in the esteem at which it has been held. Now here's the one thing that's got to be true, is this stuff has always been on the fringes. I don't care what era it is, even when, Joe's Six-Pack is buying the new, Kansas album, because he wants to hear, Carry On My Wayward Son, he might, that album coverage, badass, right? Or you get a bunch of high-ons or a bunch of burnouts that are like going, oh, they're totally on weed, totally smoking so much weed when they made that album cover. If you read this book, Rodney Matthews clearly, it's a direct quotes from Rodney. He says, I couldn't do this stuff if I was high all the time. And he's right. How many people can sit there and painstakingly put the detail and the time and the draftsmanship into this if you're fucking blitzed out of your mind? I mean, it just doesn't happen. Sure, there's people who have made great art while, on whatever substance they want to do, but it doesn't have this kind of precision. It doesn't have this kind of quality. Maybe the idea came in a drunken stupor, or became when you're high as a kite. You had the impetus of the idea. That could be true. But I think to do this art, it's like, I don't know, there's the funny thing is, I've lived with my stuff my whole life as a kid, and it's just funny how a lot of people, especially when I was younger and in school, how everybody was just, and even my dad, wrote this stuff all. It was a bunch of high-ons, a bunch of druggies coming up with this stuff. It's just like, couldn't be farther than the truth. And like I said, not to say that it didn't exist, but I would say probably most likely a lot of this stuff, music, sure. A lot of people were, Rush, I love Rush, they're big potheads. But I mean, as far as the artwork, I don't think that the artwork was as much. Not with this kind of detail and this kind of, virtuosity. There's a word people hate to hear. And so, yeah, so when he says the high esteem, right, I think that people like me who truly appreciate this stuff, you know, on a very deep level. And there are people like that, but I think we are definitely the minority. I don't think that there's enough people out there that, you know, hold this stuff in quite the esteem, you know, that I do or other people do. And that's fine. I kind of like that. Actually, I would much prefer that, tell you the truth. I mean, I know I'm sounding very contradictory here, but think about what happens. It's happened with comic books. When something becomes mainstream, you know, like I said, Joe Sixpack, or what I call normies, when normies start liking stuff, then the money starts coming into hand. And when money starts coming in hand to that extent, corporations step in, and they start just, the corporate machine just comes in and just bulldozes all of the creativity out of it. And then you're left with shit. And so I'm kind of glad that certain things can go fly under the radar of mainstream and stay somewhat cult, or very cult, and underground, because then you don't get the corporate bullshit stepping in. You know, it's not all about the money at that point. It's about, you know, the craft and the artwork of it, and I like that. I'm not saying I don't like to make money on my art. You know, I try to make money on my art. I gotta feed myself. But I think to that extent, nobody needs that kind of money. I mean, I'm for capitalism, but I think there's a certain time that you got enough fucking money, right? I'm a firm believer in that. I make as much money, you know, as you can. But at the end of the day, there's certain times where it's like, you've got enough fucking money, right? Ease off a bit, right? Because your stuff's starting to become shit. So just how I like people, you know, I like to go to a certain level and stay there, because you still need, you know, to kind of, you know, you've got to have some suffering, I think, to want to escape and want to create worlds like this. Let me just finish this up real quick. Whatever. Okay, we spend a third of our lives in various realms of fantasy, whether or not we remember our experiences and include them in our reckoning of the world. They have a direct and significant effect on everyday life. He means dreams. He means dreaming. And it's funny because he goes into detail. Fantasy is not merely wishful thinking. Remember that. Fantasy is not merely wishful thinking. Some people think that fantasy is all wish fulfillment. It's like, oh, this is my fantasy. You know, these are my fantasies that I have, you know, whatever you're into, right? And you're like, I want to escape my everyday life and live my fantasy life. And, you know, and I have a list, a laundry list of things I wish to happen, wishful thinking, you know, a wish list. Or, and the people who provide the stuff do wish fulfillment for people. That's true to the most part, but like this person says, it's not only that, right? So it says, fantasy is not mere wishful thinking, though the word is often used in the sense. Correct. So is the word dream when... Oh, sorry. So is the word dream when what is meant is daydream, which is completely different phenomenon. I agree with that. People say like, oh, she's the woman of my dreams. That's the car of my dreams. That's the home of my dreams. No, it isn't. The home of your dreams might be a nightmare. You know, it could be it could be the worst thing. You know, in your dream, you stuck living in, like, you know, the worst home in the world. That could be your dream. Your dream could be, I got stuck with the ugliest woman I've ever seen, right? Or the worst woman, most mean, evil-spirited woman you've ever seen. Or I got stuck with this jalopy car that doesn't run. That's a dream. What people, like I said, what people should specifically say is that's the girl of my daydreams. That's the house of my daydreams. Because daydreams is just wishing, right? And like he said, wish fulfillment. It says, unfortunately, some practitioners of the fantastical, whether painters or wordsmiths, art and literature, are also guilty of this confusion of the term, and their art gives the genre a bad name. But not so Rodney Matthews, whose work you have in your hand, my hand, he claims no visions nor many powerful dreams, but they flood from his pen and bright, vivid abundance, all the more powerful for being grounded on close observations of this sublunar world. What they're saying is, what this person, I think it's Nigel Suckling, I think, writes the foreword to this, and what they're talking about is, I mean, it could be Michael Moorcock could have wrote it too, is everything doesn't come completely from your imagination. It has to be somewhat grounded in reality, meaning artwork or literature that's so straight out of your imagination can be, you know, not that great. But if it's based in reality, meaning that creature, as fantastic as it is, looks like it's plausible, probably could exist. Now, I find when some people get really uptight about things being not realistic, like, oh, that totally doesn't, it's totally unrealistic. Like I said, if I wanted realism, I would stay out of fantasy life and live in the real world, right? But I want to live in this fantasy world, or I want my mind to daydream in this fantasy world. I want things to be plausible, as in this creature looks like it probably could walk upright and not fall over, right? But it's not in reality. You know, can the spaceship get to this planet, right? As long as it's explained somewhat somewhat in a logical sense, right? It could be made with, you know, space fairy dust, right? It's a little going too fantastic. I think if you try to, even if it's pseudoscience, it's bullshit science. As long as it's somewhat explained, like I said, I don't need everything to be that hyper realistic. I like it to look hyper realistic, but it doesn't have to be the science or the physics or the logic behind it doesn't have to be hyper realistic. It just has to be somewhat plausible, like a fine line, and that is a fine line to walk. So, he just kind of basically just talks about Leonardo da Vinci. He makes a reference to Leonardo da Vinci painting a Medusa and a shield, and it scared everybody. So basically, it's talking about, and again, that's the thing. So things of the time. The book goes into like biography and techniques. I'm not going to get into a huge. He's an English guy. I don't have pictures that I could find online, but there he is with his family. Obviously, probably around that time in the early '80s. Here he is taking photographs. One thing I got to say though is I've looked at this book a lot, like I said, in the '80s, and then I don't know where it went, and then I found it at a used bookstore, Classic Books down on Woodward in Royal Oak, back in like '94. So almost 10 years later, it might have been 95, 10 years later, I found it down there used, and I bought it. It was in better copy. This copy is not the best. It's okay, it's just got a little bit of a tear at the bottom of the cover. Smells like old book, doesn't smell like pot. Doesn't smell like musty basement either. But one thing I would say is, I was just seeing this picture with him, with his, his wife, who's, not bad looking. He's got his kid. He's got all his he's got his Daw fantasy books. I think Elric's behind him on his homemade bookshelf, and then he's got it right next to his drawing table there. It's just like I don't know. As a kid, I was that's what I like. It's like, oh, one of these days I want to I want to be able to have my home studio with all my books and all my stuff, and sit around and just create artwork. And here's my son, here's my attractive wife, and blah, 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 who's supportive of your artwork. And that's, the whole thing is, I'd like to support my family on my creativity, on my work. You see him out here, he's photographing stuff with his, there's a lot of things, daydreams, a lot of things in my head that I kind of wished as a kid, and as even into my 20s in the 90s, a lot of them come from just these two pictures alone. Isn't that weird? And then there's some pictures where he's taking photographs of like some very fantastic looking formations and stuff done by the beach, and I just or he's out for a walk. It talks about he gets a lot of his ideas when he was walking his dog. All of those like things that aren't. I've got some of that in my life now, but not all of it. But that stuff was just like, oh, that's my fantasy, you know, is to, I always want to do my art, you know, and be compensated for it to a point, enough to at least support my family and, you know, and myself, and do what I love, and I want everybody to be happy, and I want to be able to walk around, go for walks on the beach, you know, or wherever, or in the forest, and take photographs, and, you know, I know, just the whole kind of, you know, listen to my prog rock albums, just that whole fantasy world, that was my fantasy, you know, regardless of what the worlds are being created. And I have a little bit of that now. It's not exactly how I envisioned it. I do have a son, but I am doing it, flying it solo, so there's that. I've got a room surrounded with the crap that I like, and I go for walks down the trail, you know, and I got a beach. It's not super close, but there is a beach around, because I live on the Great Lakes, so I kind of have that a little bit. I got my prog rock, everything, but it just, everything doesn't seem like very of that time, like in my head it doesn't vision. Like the apartment doesn't really look like that cool, you know, geodome house, you know, the cool house that I kind of had envisioned in my head with my, I always had this envision of having going upstairs and having an entire upstairs lofty area be my studio. You know, and had big open windows that would look over like a forest. I always had stuff like that. I got a nice view of the courtyard, and there are trees, and it does look nice out there, but it's not how I envisioned it in my head. But I'm not complaining, because like I said, I do have aspects of that fantasy in my real life that I enjoy today. So you can't really see the book, so let me put the book aside, and I pulled up some, not all of them, I pulled up some key images, and some of the images, of course, I saved them, and they were supposed to be huge, and they're not huge, so bear with me on that one. There's the cover of the book, and like I said, some of these photographs are going to be tiny. I won't do them in order at all, either. This particular image was used in an album cover by the Tigers of Pang Tang, the Tigers of Pang Tang. They were like a metal, like a proggy metal band in like the late 70s, early 80s. There's a Pang Tang also, I believe, is a area in some of the Michael Moorcock novels. I can remember something of Pang Tang, like the port or the Sea of Pang Tang or whatever it was. And I was just thought that was cool, you know, as a kid. I was like, oh, there's a band called, you know, the Tigers of Pang Tang. And of course the book, I got a better picture of it, but the imprint, which this no longer exists, was by Paper Tiger, and Paper Tiger would put these books out. And I was looking up a lot of the Paper Tiger publications, and a lot of cool stuff. Here is Elric and Moonglim. Again, he did a lot of Elric, and probably seeing that I love the Elric novels, the Elric stuff is probably my personal favorite of all of the Rodney Matthews stuff. Now, you'll notice that Rodney Matthews, and he's also kind of synonymous with Roger Dean, doing a lot of the Yes covers. I love Roger Dean, don't get me wrong, I love the Yes covers. I'd find the Roger Dean covers to be a little bit bland in comparison to Matthews. I think Matthews does definitely more fantastic stuff, and he includes more characters. It's more comic booky. And if you notice, one of the reasons is, and you'll notice this if you look up this real close, and I read this, is he likes to ink, meaning all of these lines, this is all done as almost like a comic book. This is all done with line work, with pen and ink. And then he goes back and he uses gouache. He uses a lot of transparent watercolors. I don't know if you ever use transparent watercolors, or uses the Doc Martin inks, which they use also in comic books. So it has a very more comic vibe, and I like that a lot. I mean, you can tell it. You know, he's using more washes and stuff. He's using more. This is probably a watercolor background. It says it in the book, but I won't bore you with all the details. But this is most likely watercolors doing the background. He might even go in there with some acrylic paint or some gouache to kind of, you know, put these white mountains way in the background. And he probably uses the gouache because obviously with watercolors it absorbs into the white paper, and you're going to need, if you want to go back to white from whatever you colored, you're going to need something. You can do liquid Frisket, and it's a pain in the ass, but if you use gouache, you can use white gouache or white acrylic paint. You know, like some people call it white opaquing paint. It's what comic book artists used to use to fix their mistakes. You can use that to get your highlights, and then if you want to tint that, you can always mix that up with a little color and tint that, you know, and give yourself a little bit of tone in your highlights, because, you know, straight white always doesn't look great. But you know, this is how the masters used to do this stuff, was all, you know, traditionally. Now I use, here's another, this is a print of it. It's a little bit better, and you can see, look at all that detail in there, all those lines. I find that really meticulous. It's cool, it's got a neat look to it, but that's all hand done. All the scales are hand done. Consummate V's, consummate. But look, he's putting texture into almost every piece of this dragon creature here, flying serpent thing. He also is really, he loves the pointy, like the really, really pointy. You can see it in this, whatever this is supposed to, tree. I guess it's supposed to be a tree with snow on top. It's all pointing up, almost like little pitchforks. He's got a forked tongue. Everything's got this pointy feel to it. Swords have pointy, you know, helmets, hats, everything's pointy. So Elric, of course, obviously Elric, and then Moonglum was another character who kind of accompanied Elric. It's a really cool, there's a song called Moonglum by Hawkwind off of the Chronicles of the Black Sword, and then they do a live Chronicles album or cover of this, and you know, he talks about Moonglum and Elric. Moonglum and Elric! Now, see them travel through the open sky, see the amazing steelbird fly. Those are some of the lyrics from that song. I'm actually teaching myself that song on guitar right now. This one, sorry I don't have a great picture of it, but this one was used, I believe this was used, oh, what was it called? Oh yeah, Encore at the end. It was used, there's an album cover, and I can't remember which one it is. I know there was a book on prog rock that this thing used. I think I saw it in a magazine talking about prog rock. I thought it was, always thought it was a Hawkwind album cover, but Hawkwind never used this one. Hawkwind did use some, what do you call it, some Rodney Matthews, but this one I don't believe Hawkwind used this. I could be wrong. And I don't believe it was for Diamond Head. Diamond Head specifically made one. Oh, it's just real quick, this is another book that I've got on my wish list. It's called The Flight of Icarus. I never had The Flight of Icarus. It's a book just like this, and it's specifically Roger Dean stuff. I had Views. I think I have an image of Views here. I had Views, but I never had Flight of the Icarus. Oh, if you notice, well, I haven't done it yet, but I'll make the thumbnail for this. I'll use the Rodney Matthews font. He was also in the back, it goes into detail in the back of that book on all the different fonts, and this is like the main font, the Rodney Matthews font that he created. And I have it for the computer now, so I can put that up, or use that as well. Again, sorry, some of these pictures are tiny. I thought they were big, so you can't see that one very well. This one's Ilion of Garethorn. I wish I had a better picture. I thought it was a good picture of it, but that one, oh, here we go. I always, for some reason, I always thought she was hot. Not just because she has boobs, but I just liked her hair, and I liked that helmet, and I liked how everything has this kind of intersecting feel to it. Again, look at all that detail, and that's all hand done. And then, of course, he went back through with the inks and paints, and brought that all, give it the color. Great use of color, great use of composition. I mean, that's textbook fantasy composition right there. Of course, she's on that cool horse, but he doesn't. I mean, his girls are always kind of very stylized, but I always thought his chicks were pretty hot in his drawings. Nice, very Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah, here's that Diamond Head. It's got Elric on it too. This is a Diamond Head album cover. This one's called Lost in Limbo. It's when Elric is lost in limbo in the novels. I think it's in. I can't remember. I think that's when. Isn't that when he meets Moonglum? Or he meets one of his companions. He meets when he's in limbo, or he ends up in like a weird world. You got to read the novel. I'm not gonna give it all the way. I haven't read it in a while too. I probably read the Elric series probably 3 times in my life, and I still can't remember everything. It's been a while since the last time I read it. I think the last time I read it was in the 2000s when I was in college. But that's a cool one. This one I know for a fact it was used. There's was a band called Celestial Navigation, and they did. It was a very proggy kind of instrumentally noodling kind of thing, very self-indulgent stuff. And then that one actor, I can't remember his name is. He's kind of like a typecast actor. He just narrates these like little stories over top of him. He doesn't sing it; he narrates it. And I discovered that in like the mid-90s, and I always thought that was cool. I believe this was one of the album covers of that. Yeah, here's a better version of it. The piece is called Meridor. Again, you know, a lot of fantasy stuff has these tropes. And when I was doing art in college, and of course even before college, one of the things I always liked was this specific thing. You had some kind of fantastic beast or figure, whether it's, you know, like the girl on the horse, in the foreground. If it's a long piece like this, a horizontal piece like that, doesn't have to be. It could be perfectly square for, like, say, an album cover. But these are for album covers because it would be the front and the back of the 12-inch squares. So it's basically, imagine 2 12 inches, you know, side by side. And obviously some of the paintings were done oversized, so they're larger than 12. Essentially a double-page spread, if you think about it in comic book terms. But this is also how they did books, too, because a lot of times, and I'll show you, some of the back covers of books would have the wraparound, too, as well. You know, so that, and they even there's a section in the book where he talks about composition when it comes to layout and kind of things you have to compensate for. And one of the things, of course, is book covers. You got a whole section on books and book covers. And I remember seeing this stuff in the book, and it's always stuck in my mind, too. Where's the... He breaks it down somewhere. Some techniques, maybe? Sorry about this. I don't have an image of this, but I can show you real quick. You probably know what's going to be in there. It's kind of a... sorry, I'm not finding it at the moment. So basically what it is when you do a layout, you want to leave space. This is like for comic books or anything. You want to leave space for the text, logo type, you know, information, text that's going to be put on the image. You've got to leave space for stuff because you can't just fill up every square inch of a drawing and then expect it to... where the hell is it? I'm not going to go through hunting it down, but like the spine. So like, think about the picture. Like right down the middle, that's a bad place to put that castle, because, or dwelling, or whatever it is, because if that was a book, the spine of it's going to go right in between that, and it's going to cut all that off. So, you know, you have that to shoot. So a lot of stuff, like obviously plenty of room on top here for a logo type, you know, the logo, the title of a book, and then the texts, and then, you know, in the back you'll have maybe a synopsis, you know, or something about the author type of thing, and you need to leave enough room on the back for it. That is a Nazareth cover. I can't reach the... No Mean City. I think that's the name of the album, too, is No Mean City. I keep seeing that album cover at the used bookstore. I haven't bought it. to use the album record store, but I haven't bought it. But I might buy it eventually, just because of the art. I mean, I love Nazareth too. I just don't know any of the songs off that album. But that's a classic Rodney Matthews piece there. And again, it's you know, that's perfect because the castle is almost right directly in the back, and then the foreground figure is directly in the front. So if you cut down the spine of the record, it's for like a gatefold. Most of these are for, well, not just gatefolds, because they're for regular sleeves, front and back. You know, you put the track listing of the tracks up here. You've got the room for the title up here. I think Nazareth and that is like in the corner. I think they put it in the corner. Diamond Head would put this stuff in the corner too a lot. That's not the best picture, but that's the imprint for the book company, the publisher, Paper Tiger. Tigers of Pantang. I just love that. I always thought that was so cool. There's a big vertical piece. Again, I don't have a great copy of it. Here's a good one. I could never go on that. He has a lot of the... He does this a bunch of times. Obviously, the cover of the book is a big suspension bridge, and you've got some figures going across the top of it. It's very Relayer by Yes. Looks a lot like Relayer. It's got a lot of that, you know, the bunch of, like, you know, lances, like type of knights with lances, you know, riding across like a bridge or like the pathway up to a castle or some other craziness. And there's always this stuff in the foregrounds to kind of frame the shot. I just love that. Again, like I said, there's a lot of stuff I tried to emulate in college. And my, I remember Ray Katz, my art instructor, he was like, he's like, you really like this fantasy stuff. I'm like, you think? He's like, yeah, I noticed you always have these three different type of planes in a lot of your drawings. You got this extreme foreground, this mid-ground, and this extreme background. I said, yeah, I love that. That's my favorite composition. And he said, he says, yeah, it's very book cover, very album cover. It's like, Katz, you're older than I am. And he seems like the kind of guy too. It's just like, really? You don't know about all the fantasy? And I brought in books. I think I might have had this at the time. I think I did. I brought in that. I brought in Roger Dean's Views. I brought in a lot of stuff, a lot of Boris Vallejo, a lot of book covers, and I showed him the type of stuff that I wanted to do, and he hadn't heard of any of it. I'm like, again, he's an art instructor at college. So like I said, this stuff is not normie stuff. I mean, this stuff's pretty obscure, I think. Again, which is underground, very underground. I like it that way. There's a nice big, look at that big crazy thing. Got this crazy scorpion guy, these little critters here, these little fellers. And this, in the way they ground. Look at the use of all that warm color too. It just got such a unearthly vibe to it. I just love it. The trees, the way everything's done. That's just, I love that. I love this one. This one's also used on a book cover, and obviously I liked it not just because this witch, skulled witch. You know, I didn't realize it's a skull. I always thought it was a woman's face. Is that true? Of course, my eyes went right to her tatas there, of course. But anyways, she's got some tatas under armor here as well. But I always liked this. I mean, obviously, a lot of that stuff drew me in. But these giant pillars too, which, you know. Again, this stuff would be, I would have these in my daydreams. I would love to have this stuff show up in my dreams more. It'd be great. But most of the stuff was just me daydreaming. That's why I did so poorly in school. And, you know, and again, it's why not being able to read very well and being able to read stories about this stuff, I had to literally sit and look at this. And I would stare at this artwork for hours and just imagine, you know, and use my imagination and daydream and just live in that world. And I still do that to some extent. I think that's a lost thing because of just so much, there's just such sea of shit out there on the internet that I don't think people spend enough time with physical copies of things. I mean, you could do it with an image. I mean, you got a nice big monitor like this, you could do it with an image and just stare at the image, you know, and just look at the artwork. Really look at it and spend a lot of time looking at it. You're going to learn a lot of stuff. It's going to, you know, I hate to sound like Dr. Venture, you know, but it's going to be your muse. I feel something weird. That's inspiration, boy. But yeah, I love that. I love that show. It's good. So here's the book too. It's Andre Norton, Spell of the Witch World. This book in particular, I remember they had the hardcover of this at Rochester Book Center, and I don't think this was the book though I saw. It was very similar to this. It might even have been an Andre Norton book, but there was a hardcover, which they did those weird kind of hardcovers. They were like, this wasn't a dust jacket. This was like the cover. It wasn't like the library where they take the cover and they bind it to the hardcover and then they laminate it. It wasn't that. It had a texture to it, almost like a canvas texture, like the old Hardy Boy and Nancy Drew mystery hardcovers all had that on there. And that's how this book was. I'm sure they had a paperback version of it, and this might even be an image of the paperback. But they had those, and they had a lot of these. And like I said, that's the stuff. This is the stuff that my mind, my eyes would go straight to. I mean, I just got out of Kittyland looking at, Micronauts and Star Wars figures and He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, and I walk over, and boom, I get hit with this stuff. It's like, oh man, I want to know what this stuff is. I want action figures of all this stuff too. Great drawing. Look at that. So this is a nice, good size image. You can really see all of that line work. It's very meticulous. Like I said, you can't be high and do that, and do it that well. I'm sure there's mistakes in here. He's flubbed a few lines up. I mean, sure, yeah. But for the most part, the draftsmanship on there is beautiful. And then he comes this little guy here, and then the way he's, he most likely, he could have masked some of that off and used an airbrush and shot a mist over this to kind of give it a mist, which I probably did, but maybe not. He could have simulated that, but that does look like he has a very light mist of airbrush, probably acrylic paint shot through an airbrush. Because like I said, the inks and stuff are just going to dye the paper. It's not going to give it that look. And then obviously going back in with gouache, or acrylics, and be able to get that much highlight out of there. So that's an amazing piece. Again, you've got a foreground, your midground, your background. Your three different elements to the image. And then he would do stuff like this. It's an isometric view. It's 2-point perspective, isometric. That's very not typical. And when I first saw this image, not only did my eyes go right to Elric, because that's Elric there, but I just loved the way the creature was just splayed out on the floor, almost like a salamander, or a lizard or a crocodile. And then it's on that checkered floor. It's actually called The Checkered Floor is the name of it. And it was reminiscent of like the Dragon's Lair game to me as a kid. As this one's 1980, I probably saw this image before 1985, probably right around the time Dragon's Lair came out. I saw it somewhere. It could have been a puzzle. They did a lot of puzzles at the bookstore and put a lot of these images. I think they still do today. They do a lot of posters. You could get posters of this stuff. Bookstore didn't sell posters so much. You usually had to go to like a head shop or like Things, which is kind of like Spencer's. They had a lot of posters at a poster rack, and they do a lot of this fantasy poster stuff. And I wish I would have got more, but I remember I did go through a little phase like in 1983, 84, but I had nowhere to put it. Like I would go to Things, and they would have fantasy posters like this, and I would get them, and and I would unroll it and roll it backwards so it's flat, and then I used tape or the gum eraser, and I would gum it up on the wood paneling in the apartment we lived in there with my mom, and then when I got to the trailer, the trailer walls were always unforgiving trying to put posters on it, but I would tack a lot of this stuff up as posters to do exactly this, just stare at it, I was always thinking of was buying like a 75-inch TV and have it on a wall mount to where you could turn it vertical. You'd have to have a way of locking, or you'd have to take the image like this one. If you hit like that, right? It's full screen, but you would have to set up your images to be vertical, and then the TV could flip, and then you'd have the TV monitor. You could have the poster up, on the wall, and then you could cycle through as a slideshow. I kind of want to do that, but I don't have the room for it. It's in an apartment. It's a lot of pain in the ass, but I had that idea just so I could just have a lot of images and just cycle through them all. I love this. This is probably my favorite Rodney Matthews. I don't have it. This is a shitty, but this is a good copy. This is from a print. Actually, I think this is right from the Rodney Matthews page. I would love to buy one of these, but these are expensive. They're like $200-300 a piece. These prints. It's called The Dragon Lord, and obviously, it's got almost all of the aspects of a Rodney Matthews. Almost all of them. The only thing that's missing is that mid-ground and that fantasy castle in the background. But since it is a vertical piece, you got Elric right there, front and center. You know, he's one of my favorite characters of all time. And then there's Stormbringer right there. There's the Black Sword. The Bane of the Black Sword. Also the Black Sword by Blue Oyster Cult. Remember, everything's interconnected. You got a dragon. Cool looking dragon too. He's on a dragon. You can't really see the rider of that one because the wing's in the way, but you can see the rider appear. And what is it? I believe... I always used to think that it was a girl. It was like an elf girl, or maybe even a Melnibonéan chick on her cool-looking dragon. That's what I always wanted to believe out there. It might be a dude, though. I don't think it's Moonglum. It could be Corum, another character, or Hawkmoon. It could be Hawkmoon as well. Another character in the Michael Moorcock pantheon of characters. But in my head, as a kid, always seeing this, it was like I always thought she had green hair, green or like black hair, like white-faced, kind of, you know, like an elvish-looking type of girl. You know, my fantasy women, my women of my daydream, that type of thing. This, you know, I think this was the book that caught my attention as a kid, which is how I learned of Rodney Matthews. I mean, I'd been seeing the images for a couple of years prior to this, but not understanding until that guy pointed it out. And I probably never would have asked. I might have found it, you know, serendipitously later, but if it wasn't for that guy saying that, I would never even known it existed. I would never have known this book existed because I didn't turn around and didn't put two and two together. But I think I have a better... Oh, I don't have a better version of it, but I do have... oops. The book. So here's the cover. I don't have a side-by-side, but The Face in the Abyss. It's the name of the piece, too, The Face in the Abyss. Again, you know, your eyes usually go right to that, but Snake Woman, there's the back cover. See how they would do that. So let's go back to the main image. So yeah, you've got a lot of things going on here. You've got her in the foreground. You've got this mid-ground, which has this abyss, literally, and then there's this dude. He's got a rifle, too, so I'm wondering what the story's about. I never read this story. Again, I don't need to write this story. I could make up my own story in my head just looking at, like, why is this guy got a old-style rifle? Maybe he's, like, he's a stranger in a strange land, out of time, out of, you know, in a different dimension, or a different planet, or whatever, or different time. And then you've got this face, very... almost kind of, it's very serpentine, obviously, with the eyes. It almost looks like Moebius a little bit. And of course you got this, there's a Merilith, which is a snake girl like this, with all the different arms, different things. She's obviously only got the two appendages. But she's got the snake body, which is pretty cool. Got the cool hair, the snake headdress, you know, the big Madonna bullet bra thing, armor things. I know, it's all that stuff I just like a lot. And you got these weird, almost like snake flamingos in the background. But see all the color, all this like floral, pastel-y color. It's all interconnected with this purple, this lavender. And then you've got some of these like bluish lavenders and stuff. I just all that stuff is just really beautiful. Back cover. How are we doing on time? We better start wrapping this up. Here's one that was used. If it wasn't used on a Dragon magazine, it was definitely used on a White Dwarf magazine. I don't know which issue. I think it's more White Dwarf than Dragon, because a lot of the White Dwarf stuff was a lot of the English guys, and Rodney Matthews being an English feller, a lot of times White Dwarf would use that stuff, as opposed to, like, you know, like our American artists, like Larry Elmore, Keith Parkinson, that type of guy. Not is it Parkinson? Yeah, Parkinson. Jeff Easley. Those guys were more on Dragon. But that's a very Dungeons and Dragons piece. I mean, it's essentially they've gone down to a treasure room, to a dragon's lair, a wizard and looks like either a thief or a fighter. I think it's more of a thief to get something down there. This wizard's got some kind of magic item he's using. Hopefully this, whatever this guy is over here, he's got claws. He doesn't look human. He looks elvish. I love all these very long, beaky looking dragons. These are so cool. Again, I don't have a great photograph of that. He also did a lot of these. This also reminds me of a lot of celestial navigation. A lot of, like, you know, these sled ships. I don't know if he was the first one to start doing sled ships, like on ice. But I thought that was pretty cool. Didn't they do that in... not the Book of Book, like the man... What the hell's his name? The Mandarin. The Mannequin. Mandalorian. The Mandalorian. Didn't they do that? Didn't they have like an ice ship or something that they had in the last season? But I wonder if Matthews is the first one to do the ice ship. Just looks cool. There's a better... I know that was supposed to be a good photo, and of course it... Sorry. Again, very... I think this is Corum here. It's either I don't think that's... I think that's Corum. I don't think it's Hawkmoon. Hawkmoon's got the gold armor. I think that's Corum, I think. Just says the people of the pines, or maybe it's just some random... Because these are the pine people here, on these little dragon horses. See, they're almost like lizard men. So this is a different race of dude. A lot of pointy hats. We're a big fan of Warhammer 40,000, a lot of, you know, or even the Gondor helmets, you know, in Lord of the Rings. There's another wash bleed on another thing. I think that's too dark, and I think the other one's too bright. That was another Diamond Head cover. I'm not sure. Don't have a good version of it. There's the Twilight Tower, another vertical piece. Anything with tower, I always like. God, I thought that was a good one. Oh, here we go. Another Andre Norton. Tray of Swords. The image is called Tray of Swords, too. You got this guy here. He's got his little henchman. You got this cool fighter. You know, looks like his buddy's gone down already. You know, very fantasy, very Dungeons and Dragons, very of that time. So this is a series, the Witch World series. Yeah, that's right, because there's a Witch World book. No, I think that was the other one I was looking at was a Witch World book too. I had that, Roger Dean's Views. I'm trying to get another copy of it, but they're really hard to find because I don't know where mine went. But that was the other book I had, which is a Paper Tiger book. There's another. I think that's the cover I had, was the red cover. Well, it's the same cover, yeah, red one. Yeah, here's number one, the classic Witch World series. I have to check out the Andre Norton's Witch World series and maybe read those. Start with the first one. I always thought this is the one I thought was a Hawkwind cover at one time. I thought this was a single for, but they had Warriors on the Edge of Time, which looks like this cover, but not. And I think one of the singles off of that, whether it was the Wizard Blew His Horn or something, I swear that this was on one of those. But I could be wrong. That's definitely on a paperback. Again, see what I'm talking about? You got to compensate. That's okay to have a little bit of stuff go through there, but you got to compensate for the spine of the book. Obviously, the copy on the back, you know, the copy on the front, or the logotype, whatever you want to call it. You know, you got to leave information areas, so you're limited in to some extent in your composition, but you're following a formula. And again, that's cool. I like that. You don't have to be super static with it. You can vary it up a little bit, but I just like it how it does that. Almost looks like very bonsai type of tree too, which is cool. I think that's the end of my photographs. Alright, it's good time because it's been about an hour. So, again, I hope people watch this video, and I hope people can appreciate this stuff, because, like I said, this stuff is my id. You want to talk about what's in my psyche, what's everything that's in my just whatever I call it, my brain at a young age. This is the type of stuff that just permeated it. You know, it was all because of taking trips to the bookstore, you know. And I mean, I try to encourage my son. He's into albums. He's more into music than I was, because he went that route as far as the art, which is fine. I wish I kind of went that route. I would be a better musician today if I did at that earlier age, but I didn't. I more went into the visual stuff, the art, you know, visual arts, where he's more into the to music. Neither one of us are really big into writing. We never really went that route. Like I said, I couldn't read very well. He reads amazing, and he read a lot of books at a very young age. So he has the aptitude to become a really good writer. I just don't think it interests him as much. Like I said, me, it was purely visual from the get-go. I mean, I like to hear stories, and I liked all that stuff, but for me, it was the images. But what did it? Images before words for me. And I'm like that with comic books. And like I said, I mean, if anybody who watches my stuff on the comic books and kind of, especially some of the people that had some negative criticism for me, saying, like, you know, all this, you know, bunch of fancy artwork with no story is, you know, a crap comic. It's just like, I agree with you to a point, but I think, you know, like I said, I've said this before, if you can story tell well with images without a word on the page, again, I don't suggest, although they have been done, I don't suggest doing a comic book with no words in it, because they're tedious at best. I have a friend who did that in his comic, and I don't know, I think because he's a really good writer, I think he should go back and put something to it, some kind of words. I think trying to tell story visually takes, I mean, I don't even believe, you know, I'm not saying that, you know, I'm better than him, but I'm saying is I don't have the that skill to do it so much. I mean, I could do it with a single illustration, sure, just like any of this stuff. You know, you can extrapolate your own world based on an individual image, but when I'm specifically panel to panel trying to tell a story, I gotta have some kind of words there, you know. And same thing with him. I mean, I think his stuff, he did a pretty good job of managing that, but I think it's limited, or I think it suffers a little bit from not having, you know, some prose onto it. So, but that said, I think, you know, being able to look at an image or a couple of images, it doesn't have to be a series of images like a comic book, but just, you know, just an image in general, and just staring at it, and absorbing all of the detail from every aspect of it, and thinking to yourself, like, hey, what is that weird-looking planet way out there? Who lives there? Are these people from there, or is this their planet? Are they on tour for their crazy band and they come from Crazy Planet, you know, or are they from way out and they're not even, you know, these planets are not even anywhere near their home world, that type of thing. You know, that's cool. And again, it also plays into, I love fantasy, but I also like science fiction, and I love that in between. I love science fantasy. I love where you get, you know, space travel, and you get, you know, alien races and all that stuff. And at the flip side, you also get the fantasy aspect, you know, with it doesn't always have to be swords and sorcery. It could be still somewhat technology, but I just love that. And all of that stuff, I think, is, they don't really do a lot of that nowadays. All the new artists seem to, they take like one or two common things and they kind of go with it. I don't know. I mean, I still think there are some interesting book covers I see, but book covers, I feel, have suffered a lot in like the last 30 years. You know, I think the heyday of the stuff is the 70s and 80s. I think this when book covers really were freaking amazing, you know. But all right, sorry, I'll end this video here. But if you like it, you know, hit like, subscribe if you like this stuff. I talk about comics a lot. I figured I'd switch things up a little bit and talk about this because I just ordered this off a thrift book like a week ago and it came in, so I wanted to wanted to do a video on it. I did order another book this week of a book I got in 1987 from the Science Fiction Book Club. That who knows where that went? It's probably somewhere in limbo with the other books. But I ordered another book that I got, and I'll tell you the story behind that and why I ordered it and what's going on with that one. But all right, I'll let you go here, and I will see you on the next one. All right, bye bye.